The alien warlords of the Zithari Dominion laughed when they saw the human fleet. It was barely a handful of ships, their hulls unimpressive, their size nothing compared to the dreadnoughts of the galactic empires. The Zithari, a species that prided itself on conquest, had expected more from the upstart race that had only recently entered the wider galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds, crushed species far older than humanity, and now they had their eyes set on Earth. Admiral Vorkal of the Zithari watched from the bridge of his massive command ship, the Fury of 10 Suns, as the human ships moved into formation. He scoffed. "This is what they send to fight us? A pathetic excuse for a fleet?" His officers chuckled, their mandibles clicking in amusement. "Perhaps their leaders have accepted their fate," one of his generals said. "Perhaps this is merely a ceremonial surrender." Vorkal considered that for a moment before shaking his head. No, humans were stubborn creatures. He had seen how they fought in smaller skirmishes, how they refused to bow even when the odds were against them. But this? This was not a fleet. This was barely a defense force. "Open a channel," Vorkal ordered. The screen flickered, revealing the image of a human officer. He was an older man, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. "This is Admiral Carter of the United Terran Defense Fleet," the man said. His voice was calm, almost casual, as if he were speaking to an equal, not a warlord who had brought a fleet large enough to reduce entire planets to rubble. "You're trespassing in Terran space. Turn back now, or we will engage." Vorkal let out a deep, guttural laugh. "You're in no position to make demands, human. Do you truly believe that this—" He gestured to the sensor readings of the human fleet. "Barely a dozen ships in total. Can stand against us?" Admiral Carter tilted his head slightly. "Do you know what the worst mistake an enemy can make is, Admiral Vorkal?" Vorkal smirked. "Enlighten me." "Underestimating humans." Before Vorkal could respond, his sensor officer let out a panicked, chittering noise. "Sir, energy spikes detected. The human fleet is—" The Zithari never finished his sentence. Space erupted with fire. The tiny human ships moved in ways that defied everything the Zithari knew about fleet warfare. They didn't follow traditional formations, didn't rely on predictable engagement patterns. They weaved through space like predators, like hunters. The first Zithari battleship exploded before they even had time to return fire. Then another, and another. Vorkal's amusement vanished. "How? What weaponry are they using?" His officers scrambled for answers, but none came. Human ships should have been weak, outgunned, and outnumbered. And yet, they moved with terrifying precision, each one acting as if it were part of a single mind, a perfect unit of destruction. Vorkal's screen flickered again. Admiral Carter was still there, calm as ever. "Like I said," he repeated, "you should have turned back." And then the human fleet unleashed hell. Vorkal's warship trembled as another Zithari cruiser exploded, torn apart by a weapon they didn't even see fire. His officers screamed over one another, trying to make sense of the slaughter unfolding before them. "Impossible!" one of his generals shouted. "Their weapons! How are they hitting us so precisely?" "How are they piercing our shields?" The Zithari fleet had been invincible in every battle before this. They had crushed the Graleth homeworld in a single day. They had annihilated the advanced fleets of the Varkos Dominion. No species had ever stood against them and survived. Yet here they were, being torn apart by a fleet that was supposedly too small to be a threat. "Reverse course!" Vorkal roared. "We need distance!" His fleet scrambled to pull back, their massive warships trying to break formation, but the humans didn't let them. The moment a ship moved, the humans were there, cutting off escape routes with deadly precision. "Sir, they're ships." The tactical screen flickered with new data. and what Vorkal saw sent a cold chill through him. The humans weren't just fighting well. They were anticipating every move his fleet made. He watched in horror as a human destroyer, a ship 1/5 the size of a Zythari battleship, cut through one of his warships like it was made of paper. Its weapons didn't fire in traditional bursts, but in continuous streams of energy, pinpointing weaknesses in the Zythari armor with an eerie accuracy. It was like the humans knew exactly where to strike. "Are they reading our frequencies?" a technician stammered. "No," Vorkal whispered, eyes narrowing. "This isn't just advanced targeting. This is something else." His mind raced, searching for an explanation. The humans had barely been in the galactic community for a century. They shouldn't have technology that could counter Zythari warships. Yet ship after ship fell, their wreckage drifting like burning corpses in the void. "Sir," a comms officer gasped, "our weapons aren't locking. Their ships are scrambling our targeting systems." "How?" "Unknown." It was a nightmare. Zythari weapons were the most sophisticated in the galaxy, designed to auto-adjust to enemy shielding and countermeasures. Yet, against the humans, they were useless. Their targeting failed, their missiles veered off course, their energy beams missed, and Zythari weapons never missed. Vorkal clenched his claws into the armrest of his command chair. "You!" he growled, opening a direct channel back to Admiral Carter. The human admiral looked calm, as if he were merely overseeing a training exercise. "Having trouble, Admiral Vorkal?" Vorkal bared his teeth. "This is impossible. What have you done? What trick is this?" Carter leaned back slightly. "No trick, just preparation. You see, Admiral, the thing about humans is, we don't fight fair." The transmission cut out. A second later, the human fleet vanished. Vorkal's eyes widened. "They're gone?" "No," one of his officers gasped, frantically scanning the battlefield. They've gone stealth." "That's not possible," Vorkal hissed. "No stealth system can function in an active battle." The Zythari flagship shook violently. A deep, rumbling explosion ripped through the lower decks. Emergency alarms screamed. Then came another impact. And another. The humans weren't gone. They were everywhere. Vorkal clutched his command chair as the fury of 10 suns trembled beneath another unseen attack. The bridge lights flickered, and the stench of burning metal filled the air. "Report!" he roared. One of his officers, mandibles clicking in panic, shrieked, We can't track them. They're striking from blind spots." Blind spots? There were no blind spots on a Zythari warship. Their sensor arrays covered every conceivable angle, their shields adjusted to incoming threats in real time. Their targeting systems were the best in the Dominion. And yet, against the humans, it was like they were fighting ghosts. "Override! Fire on my command!" Vorkal bellowed. "I don't care if you have to shoot blind, return fire!" The Zythari warships unleashed hell into the void, lighting up the blackness of space with plasma volleys, railgun slugs, and missiles. Their targeting systems were useless, but raw firepower had won them wars before. But not this time. The human ships reappeared, only for brief moments, just long enough to fire another brutal barrage before disappearing into the darkness again. They weren't just using stealth. They were manipulating the battlefield, controlling the rhythm of engagement in a way Vorkal had never seen before. "They're using tactical micro-jumps," an officer rasped. "Short-range FTL jumps within combat range." Vorkal's blood ran cold. No species used FTL jumps in active combat. It was suicide. Too many variables. Too much risk. A miscalculated jump could send a ship straight into a planet, a star, or worse, another ship. And yet the humans did it flawlessly. Vorkal watched in horror as a Zythari dreadnought twisted in space, its engines erupting into flames. A human frigate had jumped directly behind it, unloading a full payload of kinetic rounds into its exposed propulsion systems before disappearing again. Another Zithari battleship tried to pull back, only for a human cruiser to jump inside its formation, slicing through its flank like a blade through flesh. "They're dismantling us," whispered one of Vorkal's generals, "like hunters taking apart their prey." The bridge shuddered again. Vorkal felt his grip tremble, not just from the impact, but from something he had never experienced before. Fear. Zithari did not fear. They were conquerors. They had subjugated countless worlds, crushed resistance with overwhelming force. Their empire was built on war, on the belief that no species was their equal. But these humans, they weren't fighting for survival. They weren't fighting for territory or glory. They were hunting, and the Zithari were the prey. A piercing alarm snapped Vorkal out of his trance. The holodisplay flickered, showing a new horror unfolding in real time. The humans had reached the fury of 10 suns. 2 of their warships, small, insignificant compared to his dreadnought, had jumped within spitting distance of his flagship. They moved with terrifying precision, their weapons pinpointing structural weak points with eerie accuracy. Then, a message flashed across the bridge. Incoming transmission from Admiral Carter. Vorkal hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to cut the transmission and fight to the last breath. But some part of him knew. The battle was over. "Put him through," he growled. The screen flickered, and there was Admiral Carter, still as calm as ever. Behind him, Vorkal could see the bridge of a human ship. No damage, no smoke, no chaos. The humans weren't just winning. They were untouched. Carter smiled. "So, Admiral, how's that invasion plan working out for you?" Vorkal bared his fangs. "What are you?" he snarled. "What kind of species fights like this?" Carter's expression didn't change. "We're human." Then the transmission cut, and the fury of 10 suns detonated. Vorkal's world dissolved into fire and silence. One moment, he was on his command deck, gripping his chair, staring into the calm, merciless eyes of Admiral Carter. The next, he was weightless, spinning in a void of debris, his body tossed like a broken doll as his flagship was torn apart from the inside out. Flames flickered in the shattered remains of the fury of 10 suns, its once mighty hull now a twisted graveyard of burning wreckage. Pieces of his crew, his officers, his war machine, all scattered, all meaningless. The Zithari had ruled the battlefield for centuries, their dominance unquestioned. But against humanity, their fleet had lasted less than an hour. Vorkal gasped, his body screaming in pain as his emergency survival suit fought to keep him alive. The autoseal had deployed in time, preserving his fragile atmosphere. But there was no ship left to save him. He was adrift in the wreckage, surrounded by the corpses of his empire's pride. And then he saw them. The human ships moved through the battlefield like apex predators surveying their kill. Their formations were perfect, every ship positioned with eerie precision, their movements efficient and methodical. There was no gloating, no reckless celebration, just cold, calculating efficiency. Vorkal's vision blurred, his consciousness flickering as his oxygen reserves dwindled. His body ached, his mind reeled. This wasn't just a loss. This was an execution. A shadow loomed over him, a sleek, black warship, its hull unmarked, untouched by the battle. A human destroyer. He felt a pull as his suit's distress beacon was locked onto. They were picking him up. Humanity didn't just want to defeat him. They wanted him to see. Vorkal awoke in a dimly lit room. The air was thick with the sterile scent of machinery. His body was restrained, not cruelly, but securely. He wasn't a prisoner in chains, but a specimen being observed. A door hissed open. Admiral Carter stepped in, his uniform still pristine, his expression unreadable. Behind him, several human officers stood silently, watching, not with hatred, not with arrogance, with curiosity. Vorkal bared his fangs. "End it," he rasped. "Kill me and be done with it." Carter tilted his head. "Kill you?" He almost sounded amused. "You think that's why we saved you?" Vorkal snarled. "You slaughtered my fleet. You wiped us from the stars. Why keep me alive? To parade me as a trophy?" Carter took a step forward, his gaze sharp. "No, Admiral Vorkal. We kept you alive because we want you to remember." Vorkal froze. "We want you to return to your dominion," Carter continued. "We want you to look your High Council in the eye and tell them what happened here. Tell them what you saw. Tell them that humanity is not to be underestimated." Vorkal's breathing grew shallow. You think this will frighten us into peace?" Carter's eyes darkened. "No, Admiral. I think this will make them desperate." He leaned in, voice calm, steady, and filled with an unshakable certainty. "And that's when we'll break them." The Zithari Dominion would never be the same. The warlords who had once laughed at the small fleet now whispered in hushed tones of the horror Vorkal had brought back with him. Not of humanity's weapons, not of their ships, but of their mindset. Of a species that didn't fight for survival, but for dominance. A species that didn't conquer, but eradicated threats. The Zithari had mocked the human fleet. But now, as their empire trembled, as their warlords hesitated, as the fear of the unknown crept into their once proud hearts, they understood. Humanity wasn't just another race in the galaxy. They were the apex predators of war. The High Council of the Zithari Dominion was silent as Vorkal finished his report. The great warlords, the supreme strategists, the rulers of 1,000 conquered worlds, all sat frozen in their seats, their mandibles twitching, their bodies stiff with barely concealed fear. The chamber, carved from black obsidian, had never known silence before. It was a place of power, of unchallenged rule. Here, conquests were planned. Here, species were condemned to extinction with the stroke of a pen. Here, the fate of entire civilizations was decided without hesitation. But today, hesitation ruled. Vorkal stood before them, his body gaunt from his time in human captivity. His scars, both physical and unseen, marked him as a warrior who had faced something beyond the understanding of his kind. His voice, once commanding, now carried the weight of a broken empire. "They did not fight like us," he said again, his voice a low rasp. "They did not fight like the Varkos, who relied on overwhelming numbers. They did not fight like the Gralith, who waged war through attrition. They did not fight like any species we have ever encountered." He looked each council member in the eye. "They hunted us, they studied us, and when they struck, it was with the precision of a species that kills to exterminate." High Chancellor Zithun, the oldest and most revered of their kind, leaned forward. His eyes, black and pitiless, regarded Vorkal with measured coldness. "And yet you survived." Vorkal's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Because they let me, because they wanted me to come back here and tell you." Zithun exhaled slowly. "And what, Admiral Vorkal, do you believe their true intentions are?" Vorkal clenched his fists. "They did not just want to win this battle, they wanted to send a message, and now I am here delivering it." Zithun sat back, his clawed fingers steepled. "And what is this message?" Vorkal stared at him, unblinking. "That humanity does not fight wars. They end them." The chamber erupted into chaos. Some warlords hissed in outrage, pounding their fists against the long stone table. Others whispered in hushed tones, their voices betraying unease. A few sat in stunned silence, their gazes distant, already seeing the future written in fire. One counselor, younger and more arrogant than the rest, stood abruptly. "We should strike now. The humans are few in number. Their technology, while formidable, is not without weakness. If we mobilize the full strength of the Dominion, we can crush them before they become a greater threat." Vorkal turned his weary eyes to the fool. "You still do not understand." The young counselor sneered. "Enlighten me, defeated one." Vorkal did not rise to the insult. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice like a blade. "We were not fighting humanity's full strength. That was only a handful of their ships, a scouting force, a test." He exhaled sharply. "And we failed that test." Silence fell once more. Zithun tapped his claws against the table, his gaze unreadable. "You claim they fight like no other. What then is their true strategy?" Vorkal's mandibles tightened. "They are patient." He looked around the chamber, ensuring every warlord met his gaze. "They do not seek to defeat us in a single war. They are learning us, studying us, and when they are ready, truly ready, they will not fight us with ships or soldiers." He took a deep breath. "They will dismantle us from within. They will sow fear. They will make us hesitate. And when the moment comes, we will defeat ourselves before they ever fire a shot." Zithun stared at him for a long moment. Then, the High Chancellor did something that had never been done in the history of the Dominion. He stood, and he bowed his head. "The Dominion," he said, his voice solemn, "must decide whether we wish to survive, or be remembered as another name in humanity's history of fallen enemies." The chamber remained silent. For the first time, the Zithari Dominion was not planning a war. They were planning how to avoid one. Days passed in uneasy silence. The Zithari Dominion, once so eager for conquest, now stood on the precipice of a decision that could alter its fate forever. The warlords, the strategists, the ruling elite. They all whispered among themselves, weighing their options, grasping for a way to reclaim the pride that humanity had shattered. Vorkal remained within the High Council chambers, summoned to give further testimony. They questioned him endlessly, dissecting every detail of the battle, of the human tactics, of their behavior. He answered each question with the same chilling truth. "You cannot defeat them as you have defeated others. If you attack, they will not simply retaliate, they will end you." And yet, some among the council still refused to believe. "We have more ships," one general argued. "More soldiers, more firepower. If we mobilize everything, we can—" Vorkal slammed his fist against the table. "You still do not understand?" His voice echoed through the chamber. "You could send 1,000 fleets, and it would not matter. The humans will not fight you on your terms. They will fight you on theirs. And by the time you realize the war has begun, it will already be over." The warlords murmured, uneasy. Then, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Tell me, Admiral," High Chancellor Zithun said, his black eyes cold as the void. "If what you say is true, if humanity is as relentless as you claim, what is the solution?" Silence fell once more. Vorkal took a slow breath. He had spent restless nights thinking about this, turning it over in his mind, knowing that the wrong answer could doom his people. At last he spoke. "The only way to survive," he said slowly, "is to convince humanity that we are not their enemy." Scoffing erupted from some of the warlords. "A dominion does not beg for peace," one spat. Vorkal's gaze sharpened. "You think this is begging? Number, this is strategy." He took a step forward, his voice lowering. "The humans respect strength, but not the kind we have used for centuries. They respect intelligence, resilience, and adaptation. If we show them that we can learn, that we are not a mindless empire of brutes, They may see us as something other than prey. Zithun studied him. And if they refuse? Vorkal's mandibles tightened. Then we die. A long pause. The High Chancellor's claws tapped against the stone table in thought. Then he spoke. Prepare an envoy. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The warlords glanced at one another in shock. Never before had the Zithari Dominion sent an envoy to an enemy. They did not negotiate. They conquered. But now they had no choice. The diplomatic ship carrying the Zithari envoy drifted into human-controlled space, broadcasting peaceful intent. They received no immediate response, no warning, no greeting, just silence. It was not until the ship reached the edges of a Terran defense station that they were finally hailed. "This is Fleet Command," a calm voice said over the comms. "State your purpose." The Zithari diplomat hesitated, then spoke the words that had never before left the lips of his kind. We seek an audience with humanity." There was a pause. Then, in the cold, unreadable voice of the human officer, came the reply, "Stand by." The transmission cut. And the Zithari, for the first time in their history, waited in fear for what came next. The Zithari diplomatic ship floated in eerie silence, its crew tense as they waited for a response. The humans had acknowledged their request, but had given no indication of what would happen next. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The void of space was vast and empty, yet the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on the Zithari crew. They knew they were being watched, scanned, analyzed. Humanity did not react in haste. They studied first. Inside the ship's dimly lit council chamber, the chief envoy, Lord Zalvok, paced restlessly. He was no soldier, yet the weight of his mission bore down on him as if he were leading an invasion force. "They are making us wait on purpose," one of his aides muttered. "Of course they are," Zalvok said, his voice tight. "This is a message. They want us to feel powerless before we even speak." His mandibles clicked in frustration. The Zithari Dominion had never before sent emissaries to negotiate. Their method of diplomacy had always been conquest. The idea that they were now at the mercy of another species was unthinkable. But here they were. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the human response came. "Docking coordinates transmitted. You will follow the path exactly as instructed. Any deviation will be considered an act of hostility. You will leave all weapons aboard your vessel. Non-compliance will result in termination." Zalvok stiffened. There was no room for negotiation in that message. No pleasantries. No attempt to make the Zithari feel welcome. Just a cold statement of control. The humans had already set the terms. The Zithari diplomats moved in absolute silence as they exited their ship, stepping into the vast docking bay of the Terran station. The chamber was enormous, its steel-gray walls towering over them. Bright white lights illuminated the space with an unnatural sterility, making it feel more like a laboratory than a diplomatic hall. A squad of human soldiers stood waiting, weapons holstered but present. They wore dark uniforms with armored plating, their expressions unreadable behind their visors. These were not mindless guards. They were warriors, watching every move with silent calculation. At the center of them stood him, Admiral Carter. Zalvok had heard the stories, had studied the reports from Vorkal. The human admiral was as much a weapon as any of their warships. His face was calm, composed, betraying no emotion. "You requested an audience," Carter said, his voice even. "We're listening." Zalvok hesitated. He had expected a grand hall, a formal negotiation table, the rituals of diplomacy that all galactic empires followed. Instead, the humans treated this as if they were merely allowing an insect to speak before deciding whether or not to crush it. Swallowing his pride, Zalvok stepped forward. "The Zithari Dominion," he began. Carter cut him off. "We already know who you are. Get to the point." Zalvok's mandibles twitched, but he forced himself to remain calm. "We come to propose a truce." For a moment there was silence. Then Carter let out a slow breath, his eyes locking onto Zalvok's with a piercing intensity. "A truce?" He repeated the word carefully, as if testing it. Zalvok nodded. "Yes. We acknowledge that we underestimated your people, that our aggression was, misguided." The words tasted bitter. "We wish to avoid further conflict. We seek an understanding between our species." Carter didn't react. He simply studied Zalvok for a long, excruciating moment. Then he turned slightly, glancing toward one of his officers. "Get me the list," Carter said. A woman in a Terran uniform handed him a data slate. Carter scanned it briefly before looking back at Zalvok. "Tell me something," Carter said, his voice suddenly colder. "Do you know how many civilizations have come to us with the same request?" Zalvok hesitated. I do not." 36, Carter said, tossing the data slate onto a nearby table. 36 empires, species, and warlords who once looked at us the same way you did, who saw us as weak, as insignificant, who thought humanity was just another obstacle to be crushed under their expansion. Zalvok remained silent. Carter took a step forward, his gaze never breaking. "Do you know how many of those 36 still exist?" The Zithari envoy swallowed hard. How many?" Carter leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. 4. Zalvok's blood ran cold. "That is the reality of what you face," Carter continued. "When we fight, we don't fight for land or glory. We don't fight for conquest. We fight to win. And when we win, we erase those who thought they could break us." The Zithari envoy tried to maintain his composure, but he felt small under Carter's gaze. "You want a truce?" Carter asked. "You want to avoid further conflict?" He scoffed. "Number, you want mercy." Zalvok opened his mouth to protest, but Carter wasn't finished. "Tell me, Lord Zalvok," the human admiral said, his tone like ice, "why should humanity spare the Zithari Dominion?" The envoy had no answer. For the first time in Zithari history, they had nothing to offer but their own survival. Zalvok had spent his life negotiating the terms of surrender from lesser species. He had seen once mighty civilizations grovel before the Zithari Dominion, begging for mercy. Now, for the first time in his existence, he was the one begging, and the humans weren't listening. Admiral Carter's gaze burned into him, demanding an answer that Zalvok did not have. Why should humanity spare the Zithari? He struggled for words, his mandibles clicking with barely concealed desperation. Because war between us would bring ruin to both sides." Carter didn't blink. "You don't believe that?" Zalvok hesitated. "You still think you have a chance," Carter said, his voice laced with quiet amusement. "You still believe that if you can just regroup, rebuild, strike first, maybe you can turn the tide." He leaned in. "You can't." Zalvok tensed, his pride warring with the cold truth. "The Dominion does not bow." Carter's lips curled into something that was almost a smile. "Oh, you will." The words sent a chill through Zalvok's bones. Carter turned to one of his officers. "Send the data." The officer pressed a few buttons on their wrist device. A moment later, Zalvok's wrist comm flickered to life. He hesitated, then looked down, and his blood ran cold. On the screen was a real-time scan of Zithari space. Human ships were already there, not attacking, not invading, simply watching, inside Dominion territory, undetected, until now. Zalvok's breath hitched. "That's impossible." Carter crossed his arms. "You're not the first empire to underestimate our reach." Zalvok's mind reeled. The Dominion's defenses were supposed to be impenetrable. And yet here were Terran warships, deep in Zithari territory, before any official peace talks had even begun. The humans had already won. They could have struck first. They could have burned the Dominion's worlds to cinders, crippled their fleets before they ever saw the attack coming. But they hadn't. They had waited. Because this was never about war. It was about control. Carter let the silence stretch, watching as the weight of realization crashed down on Zalvok. Then he spoke. "Here's how this is going to work," he said, voice calm and measured. "You're going to take our terms back to your High Council. You're going to tell them exactly what you saw here today, and they're going to agree." Zalvok's mandibles clenched. "And if they don't?" Carter's smile didn't waver. "Then your species joins the other 32. The room felt cold. Zalvok wanted to argue, to find some loophole, some way to salvage the Dominion's pride. But there was nothing left to salvage. Humanity had made its decision. The Zithari Dominion would not be conquered. It would be owned. Zalvok bowed his head. "I will deliver your message." Carter stepped back, giving a small nod. "Good." He turned to his officers. "Escort them back to their ship." As Zalvok and his delegation were led away, he could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him. Not just the humans in the room, but the thousands watching from the shadows. He had come seeking peace. He had found submission. And in his heart, he knew. The Dominion was no longer the master of the stars. Humanity was. The journey back to Zithari space was suffocating. Zalvok sat in his private chamber aboard the diplomatic vessel, staring at the data slate in his hands, the same one Admiral Carter had given him before they left. He had played the transmission over and over, as if trying to find some flaw, some weakness in humanity's plan. There was none. The humans had already won. They had infiltrated Zithari space before negotiations had even begun. They knew the Dominion's fleet movements, its supply lines, its vulnerabilities. And yet they hadn't struck. They had given Zalvok time to bring their demands back to the High Council. This wasn't diplomacy. This was a slow, methodical strangulation. He gripped the slate tighter, his mandibles twitching in frustration. How had this happened? The Zithari had ruled the stars for centuries, crushing civilizations under their heel. And now they were the ones being dictated to. A soft chime broke the silence. His aide entered, bowing low. "Lord Zalvok, we are approaching the capital world. The High Council awaits your report." Zalvok sighed, rising from his chair. "Then let us not keep them waiting." The High Council chamber was filled with tension as Zalvok stepped inside. The warlords and strategists stared at him, their expressions unreadable. Some were expectant, others skeptical, but most were uneasy. They had sent him to negotiate, but they had not expected him to return looking defeated. Zithun, the High Chancellor, observed him carefully. "Speak, Lord Zalvok. What has humanity offered?" Zalvok hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It is not an offer, High Chancellor. It is an ultimatum." Murmurs spread through the chamber, but Zithun silenced them with a raised claw. "Explain." Zalvok exhaled and activated the data slate. The transmission from Admiral Carter played for all to see. It was brief, to the point, and undeniably terrifying. "The Dominion will cease all hostile expansion immediately. You will withdraw from contested territories and recognize Terran sovereignty over human-claimed worlds. In return, humanity will allow your species to exist. This is non-negotiable." The silence that followed was heavier than any battle Zalvok had ever witnessed. Finally, one of the warlords hissed, "This is madness. The humans expect us to surrender without a fight." Another slammed his fist on the table. "We still have our fleets, our armies. We do not yield to threats." Zalvok turned on them, his voice rising. "You think this is just a threat? Look at the second file." Zithun did. His expression remained neutral, but the others gasped as the data unfolded before them. Fleet positions, supply lines, communication hubs, all compromised. The humans were already inside their empire. They had the ability to cripple the Dominion without a single large-scale battle. Zalvok's voice was grim. "They do not need to invade. They do not need to fight. If we refuse their terms, they will dismantle us from the inside. Our fleets will never reach human space before our own supply lines collapse." A warlord stood, trembling with rage. "Then we strike first! If we are doomed, let us go down fighting!" Zalvok's eyes darkened. "That is exactly what they want. If we attack now, they will not respond with negotiations. They will erase us." The chamber fell into a deep, uneasy quiet. Finally, Zithun spoke. "Then we must decide. Do we fight and risk extinction? Or do we submit?" It was a question no Zithari had ever asked before. But humanity had forced them to ask it. The warlords argued, voices rising in fury, in fear, in denial. Some still clung to pride, unwilling to accept the reality before them. Others understood that this was no longer a battle of ships and soldiers. It was a battle of survival itself. Zithun let them speak for a time, then raised his claw once more. The chamber fell silent. His decision was already made. "Prepare the declaration," he said coldly. "The Dominion will accept humanity's terms." The words hung in the air like a funeral dirge. For the first time in its long and brutal history, the Zithari Dominion bowed to another power. Days later, the official announcement spread across the galaxy. The mighty Dominion, the empire that had once brought terror to countless species, had surrendered without a war. There was no treaty signing, no pomp, no ceremony, just a single transmission sent to humanity. "The Zithari Dominion acknowledges Terran supremacy. We will not oppose you." The response from Earth was equally brief. "Acknowledged." And just like that, it was over. The Zithari had mocked the small fleet. Now they would never dare mock humanity again. The alarms blared across the command deck of the Zifran Dominion's border station. Crimson warning lights pulsed in rhythm with the urgent wails of the defense system. Admiral Vroth, a seasoned veteran of the Dominion's navy, narrowed his slit-pupiled eyes as he read the incoming data stream. "Unknown human vessel detected. Unauthorized entry into restricted space. Designation, battleship class. Configuration, unknown." A chill settled over the bridge. Humanity? They were primitive compared to the Dominion, barely scratching the surface of deep space travel. The last known human warships were outdated, sluggish things, more useful for policing their own system than posing a threat to an empire spanning hundreds of light years. Yet here it was. A single warship, the size of a dreadnought, moving with impossible precision through the asteroid fields that marked the Dominion's outer borders. It should have been torn apart. No known human ship had the maneuvering thrusters necessary for such a feat. Vroth leaned forward, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "Open a channel," he ordered. A subordinate complied, and static filled the speakers. Then a voice, clear, cold, human. "This is the UNS Revenant. You are advised to disengage all weapon systems and allow passage." The bridge fell silent. A human ship issuing commands? To the Dominion? The arrogance, Vroth snarled. "Human vessel, you are in violation of Dominion space. Power down immediately, or you will be destroyed." There was a pause. Then, the voice returned, still calm. "If you could destroy us, Admiral, you would have already." The ship continued its approach, undeterred. Vroth's claws curled into the armrests of his command chair. "Target their engines, disable them. If they refuse to comply, obliterate them." His officers obeyed, and the station's turrets locked onto the unknown battleship. But the instant they fired, something impossible happened. The Revenant blinked. Not warped, not accelerated. It vanished and reappeared several kilometers closer in an instant, as if reality itself had bent to its will. The incoming plasma bolts passed harmlessly through the empty space where it had once been. Gasps filled the bridge. No Dominion ship had that kind of technology. Not even the core world fleets possessed instantaneous movement. Then, a new alarm blared. A boarding signature. Vroth turned just in time to see his security officers collapse, their bodies crumpling under the weight of unseen force. The air shimmered. And then the humans appeared. They weren't wearing any visible armor, but their forms were covered in sleek, dark plating that pulsed with unnatural energy. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, reflective visors. One of them, the tallest, stepped forward. A simple gesture, and the station's weapons systems shut down. "You have something we need," the figure said. Vroth bared his teeth. "What are you?" The human tilted their head slightly. "The future." Vroth's mind raced. This was impossible. Humanity was supposed to be behind the Dominion in technology, yet here they were, standing on his bridge, shutting down his weapons, rendering his forces useless. The human in dark plating took another step forward. Even without a visible weapon, something about them radiated power. Not brute strength, but the quiet, unshakable confidence of a predator in a room full of prey. Vroth's claws twitched toward the emergency override panel on his command chair. A last resort protocol. If he could activate it, he could purge the bridge with plasma, incinerating everyone inside, including himself if necessary. The human's visor shifted, not physically, but something in it pulsed, as if they could see his thoughts. "You're considering self-destruction," the human said smoothly. "That won't work." Vroth snarled, baring his fangs. "You think I fear death, human?" The figure remained still. Then, with a mere flick of their wrist, the lights in the command center dimmed, and every control panel in the room rewrote itself. Dominion symbols flickered and changed, text lines converting into strange, unknown code before stabilizing into something Vroth had never seen before. The entire station had been hacked. Impossible. "You don't fear death," the human agreed, "but your empire does." Vroth's throat tightened. He forced himself to stand tall. "You are one ship, one battleship. No matter what trickery you possess, you cannot stand against the full might of the Dominion." The human was silent for a moment. Then they turned slightly, raising a hand to their helmet. "Proceed." From the station's external cameras, the crew saw them. Dozens of blinding rifts tore open across the void. Not warps, not hyperdrives, something else entirely. And from them emerged more human vessels, sleek, black, moving without the clunky thrusters of lesser ships. Silent, perfectly aligned. Each one was bigger than the last. The bridge officers went pale. "This," one of Vroth's subordinates whispered, voice shaking. "This wasn't a scouting ship. It was a warning." Vroth's blood ran cold. The Revenant had entered Dominion space alone, and the Dominion had dared to challenge it. Now, humanity had responded. The human leader took a step closer to Vroth. their voice barely above a whisper. "You wanted to see what we were capable of, Admiral. Now you will." And with that, the war began. The silence that followed was heavier than any gravity Vroth had ever encountered. Every officer on the bridge, every soldier, every technician, each of them sat frozen as their screens displayed the impossible. The human fleet had arrived. Not just a few ships, hundreds. And these were not the crude, outdated vessels the Dominion had classified as low threat. These were something else. Their hulls gleamed with a blackness that devoured the starlight around them, absorbing sensor pings as if they refused to be read. No drive signatures, no visible weapons. And yet they moved with purpose, not like ships blindly following orders, but like predators closing in for the kill. Vroth felt his mandibles tighten. This was not a battle. This was an execution. A lieutenant at the control station suddenly cried out, her scaled hands shaking over the terminal. "Admiral, they're inside our network. Our defenses are shutting down." Vroth turned sharply. "Impossible. We run a closed system. Human technology shouldn't even be capable of interfacing with—" The lights flickered again. Then, in perfect unison, every turret, missile battery, and shield generator in the sector powered down. An eerie, absolute silence followed. Vroth clenched his fists. How? The human leader on his bridge tilted their head, observing him. Their expression was still unreadable behind that gleaming visor, but their body language was relaxed, almost bored. "Your systems were child's play," the human said simply. "You built your empire on brute force. We built ours on understanding the very fabric of reality." Vroth snarled, stepping forward. "You think you can intimidate me, human? I have commanded Dominion fleets for decades. I have burned worlds that refuse to kneel. I have annihilated entire species for defying the Dominion. And you think I will kneel to you?" The human was quiet for a moment. Then they stepped forward too, slowly, deliberately. Vroth expected a weapon, a threat, a display of power. Instead, the human simply said, "You misunderstand. We're not here for you to kneel. We're here to ensure you don't get back up." The words hit like a plasma blast. Vroth's subordinates exchanged looks, fear crawling up their spines. Even the most battle-hardened among them knew this was different. Then, the human raised a hand to their helmet again. "Proceed." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Dominion's fleet exploded, not from human weapons, not from enemy fire. They detonated from within. Vroth watched, horrified, as the massive Dominion dreadnoughts in high orbit around the station burst into fiery ruins, their hulls splitting apart like they had been unmade at a molecular level. "What have you done?" he whispered. The human didn't answer right away. They turned, glancing at the display screen that showed the destruction outside. Then they said, "Your mistake wasn't letting us enter your space. Your mistake was assuming we weren't already here." The realization hit Vroth like a hammer to the skull. They hadn't just hacked the station. They had infiltrated the Dominion's entire fleet. This had been planned, not a battle, an extermination. Vroth's claws trembled. He had fought in countless wars, crushed resistance movements, outmaneuvered rivals. But never, never had he faced an enemy that fought like this. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The human turned back to face him. "We have been inside your networks for years, learning, watching, preparing." Vroth felt sick. The Dominion's military prided itself on strength, on control, and yet the humans had slipped beneath their defenses without a single shot fired. Until now. "You can't win," Vroth growled, clinging to the last shreds of his pride. "The Dominion controls thousands of worlds. Not anymore. the human interrupted. They gestured at the screens, where Dominion worlds, entire planets, were going dark one by one, each losing power, each surrendering before a single human ship had even arrived. "Your people are smart," the human continued. "Smarter than your leaders. They're choosing surrender, because they know fighting us is suicide." Vroth staggered back, gripping his chair. His empire was crumbling in real time. The human leader tilted their head again, studying him. Then, they finally drew a weapon, a small, sleek, glowing device that fit into the palm of their hand. Not a gun, something else. "You, however," the human said, voice filled with something resembling pity, "don't get the luxury of surrender." And with a simple press of a button, the bridge filled with light. Pain. For the first time in decades, Admiral Vroth felt true pain. It wasn't the sharp agony of a blade or the searing burn of plasma. It was something deeper, something that crawled into his very being and shredded his mind apart, one thought at a time. His vision fractured, his body convulsed, and his consciousness wavered. It felt like every nerve in his body was being rewritten, every muscle forced into submission by an unseen force. His thoughts scattered like dust in a solar storm. And then it stopped. Vroth collapsed onto the deck, his breath ragged. The weight of whatever had invaded him receded, but the sensation lingered, like his mind had been touched by something beyond his comprehension. He forced himself to look up. The human leader still stood there, calm, unreadable behind their visor. Their small device, whatever it had been, was now inactive, though the air around it still crackled. Vroth tried to speak, but his throat refused to obey. His limbs trembled. His body felt wrong. What have you done?" he rasped, barely recognizing his own voice. The human tilted their head slightly, as if contemplating whether or not to answer. Then, with the same eerie calm, they said, "We unmade your chains." Vroth bared his teeth. You think you've broken me? I am Dominion. I do not break." The human didn't react to the outburst. They simply gestured at the surrounding officers, Vroth's own people, who stood frozen, watching the exchange in stunned silence. "Do you feel it?" the human asked, addressing the bridge crew now. The absence? Vroth didn't understand, but then he saw it in their faces. The hesitation, the confusion, the fear. One of the officers, a younger lieutenant, stumbled backward, clawed hands clutching at his temples. His breathing was erratic, his pupils dilated. "It's gone," he whispered. I don't understand. I don't feel it anymore." Vroth's mind reeled. The human took a slow step forward. "Your empire was built on more than just fear, Admiral. It was built on control, mental control. Your rulers bound every officer, every soldier, every citizen into the Dominion's will. That's why your people never rebelled. That's why your troops fought to the death without question." Vroth's blood ran cold. How did they know? No outsider had ever understood the Dominion's true grip on power. Their empire wasn't just held together by force. It was enforced through centuries of carefully engineered neural conditioning. Every officer, every citizen was linked to the Dominion's will. It wasn't mind control, not exactly, but a constant, unshakable presence in their thoughts. A pressure, a guiding force, the will of the Dominion itself. And now, Vroth reached into his mind, searching, desperate for that presence, but he found nothing, a gaping void where it should have been. Panic set in. His claws scraped against the cold metal floor. He tried to force himself to stand, but his body felt disconnected, as if he no longer knew how to function without that guiding force. Vroth's voice was a low snarl, but it lacked its usual power. "You severed us. The human nodded once. Yes. The bridge officers staggered, realization dawning across their faces. Without the Dominion's mental grip, without the chains that had bound their thoughts since birth, they were free, and it terrified them. "No," one of them whispered. "No, this is wrong. I don't know what to do." Vroth watched in horror as officers, his officers, began to crumble. Some clutched their heads, overwhelmed by the sudden silence in their minds. Others backed away from their stations as if the very idea of acting on their own free will was too much to bear. The Dominion had not raised leaders, it had raised servants. Without orders, without the constant guiding force, they were directionless. The Dominion didn't rule by strength, it ruled by enslavement. And the humans had just torn it all away. Vroth forced himself to his feet, rage burning through his veins. You think this makes you victorious?" His voice was raw, venomous. "You think you've won because you cut our leashes?" The human remained unmoved. "You have doomed them," Vroth spat, gesturing toward his faltering officers. "They are not like you. They were made to serve. They will break without the Dominion's guidance." The human finally moved. They stepped closer. Too close, until Vroth could feel the unnatural presence radiating from them. Then, in a voice that was almost gentle, the human said, "Then let them break." Vroth's breath caught. "Let them break," the human continued. "Let them shatter. Let them fall apart piece by piece, because only when something breaks can it be rebuilt into something stronger." Vroth's fists clenched, claws scraping against his own palms. His empire, his entire empire, was collapsing around him. And these humans, these creatures who had once been dismissed as insignificant, had brought it all down without ever firing a single real shot. "You are monsters," Vroth whispered. The humans simply turned away. "No," they said. "We are free." And then the command deck doors slid open, revealing more of them. More humans in those impossible suits, walking with the kind of certainty only a conqueror could possess. Vroth knew in that moment that the Dominion was finished, and humanity had won. Vroth stood in the wreckage of his own existence. His empire, once a monolith of control and dominance, was crumbling before his eyes. The bridge of his command station, once a symbol of authority, had become nothing more than a prison. The human leader had turned their back on him, their attention now on their soldiers. They spoke in their strange, clipped language, efficient, calm, as if this wasn't the single most devastating moment in galactic history. Vroth swallowed his fury. His entire body trembled, but he forced himself upright, straightened his posture, and faced the enemy. "If you believe you can break the Dominion with this single act," he snarled, "then you are fools." The human didn't turn back immediately. Instead, they adjusted something on their wrist, their visor reflecting the pale red emergency lights still flickering around the room. Finally, they spoke. "We never planned to break the Dominion in a single act, Admiral." The air shifted. A deep hum, so low it was almost imperceptible, pulsed through the station. It wasn't from the Dominion systems. Those had long been hijacked. This was something else, something deeper, something that vibrated in the very core of the structure itself. Vroth's claws twitched. What? Then the holograms activated. Every screen, every display, every single transmission node in the entire station shifted, broadcasting something new, something the entire Dominion would see. The truth. Vroth's own face appeared on the monitors, but it wasn't the version the Dominion had shown its people. It was raw, unfiltered. Next to it, footage from hidden Dominion archives flashed, images of the atrocities his empire had committed, Worlds razed, species enslaved, populations culled because they were deemed inefficient. Vroth's own voice played, pulled from classified logs. They are tools, nothing more. A strong empire does not ask permission. It takes. Fear is the key to obedience. Without it, we are nothing. The bridge crew staggered as they saw the truth, their truth, displayed for the first time without Dominion censorship. And it wasn't just here. Through the massive viewport, Vroth saw flickers of distress signals lighting up Dominion-controlled space. Transmission towers, civilian hubs, entire fleets were receiving this data in real time. It wasn't a military assault. It wasn't an invasion. It was revelation. The human leader finally turned to Vroth, their stance relaxed, confident. Your empire is not dying because of us, Admiral. It's dying because it was built on a lie. Vroth could barely breathe. The Dominion's greatest weapon had always been its control over information. It shaped reality, dictated history, erased anything that didn't serve its narrative. The people, his people, had never questioned it because they had never known another reality until now. Now the entire galaxy had seen, and there was no coming back from it. You! Vroth's voice cracked, his throat dry. He turned to the screens where panic was spreading like wildfire. Entire colonies were revolting. Military officials were defecting. A system that had held for thousands of years was unraveling in mere moments. How? He barely recognized his own voice. How did you get this data? The human tilted their head, as if the answer was obvious. You stored it. Vroth's heart stopped. You kept records of every atrocity, the human continued. Every crime, every massacre, every shadow war. You archived them in hidden servers, buried them beneath layers of security, convinced that if the truth was locked away, it could never be used against you. They leaned in slightly. But humans, we are very good at digging up the past. Vroth felt his world end. The bridge crew, those who had once followed him without question, looked at him now with horror, disgust. And then the real nightmare began. Incoming signals flooded the station's channels, not just from Dominion territories, but from other galactic powers. The Dominion had many enemies, races and civilizations that had been too afraid to challenge its might. But now, they saw a wounded beast, a dying beast. The distress calls were not coming from Dominion forces. They were coming from the worlds the Dominion had once ruled, from generals turning on their masters, from civilians rising up against their overlords. The humans hadn't just attacked a military installation. They had shattered an empire's soul, and there was no stopping what came next. Vroth's claws clenched into fists. He should have attacked, ripped the human's throat out, fought to his last breath. That's what a true Dominion warrior would have done. But he didn't. Because for the first time in his life, he had no orders, no voice guiding him, no empire to hold him, no future he could see. He was alone, and that more than anything was what truly broke him. The human leader took one last glance at the chaos they had unleashed. Then they turned away. Your people will decide what happens next, they said, not you. And with that, they left. The doors slid shut behind them, and Admiral Vroth, once one of the most powerful beings in the Dominion, was left standing in the ruins of everything he had ever known. Alone. Vroth did not move. He stood frozen, his claws twitching at his sides, his mind an endless void of static. The command bridge was silent, too silent, except for the quiet hum of failing Dominion systems. His officers still stood at their stations, but none of them looked at him. They were watching the screens, watching their empire collapse. A voice finally broke the silence. What do we do now? It was the young lieutenant, the one who had first realized the Dominion's grip on their minds had been severed. He looked lost, his eyes darting between the broken displays, his claws gripping the console as if it could somehow hold him together. Vroth had no answer. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. Before today, he had always known his purpose: follow orders, enforce the Dominion's will, crush resistance, expand, rule, repeat. Now there was nothing. The human had been right. The Dominion had not raised leaders. It had not raised warriors. It had raised servants, beings bred to obey, to never question, to exist only as extensions of an empire that no longer existed. Another officer spoke. "Admiral, if the Dominion is truly—" He hesitated. The words felt wrong in his mouth, as if admitting them would make them real. "If the Dominion is truly gone, what do we do?" Vroth turned slowly, his mandibles clicking together in frustration. The words caught in his throat. He wanted to say something, anything to reassert control, to command, to take back the certainty that had been stripped from him. But what could he command? His fleet was destroyed. His empire was in flames. His people were fractured beyond repair, and worst of all, they were free. Vroth's claws dug into his palm. Freedom. He had always seen it as a weakness, a disease that lesser species clung to in the absence of true strength. The Dominion had been great because it had stripped freedom away, replacing it with order, and yet, in its absence, his people were crumbling. Another officer stepped forward, his voice raw with desperation. "Admiral, we need orders!" Vroth's fists clenched. Orders. For so long, that was all any of them had known. They had never been taught how to think beyond the will of the Dominion. And now that will was gone. The bridge officers, all hardened warriors, all once unwavering in their duty, now looked at him like frightened children, because they were, because they had never been allowed to grow, and the humans had known. That was their true weapon, not just technology, not just warfare, understanding. They had understood the Dominion in ways even its own rulers had not. They had known that the empire was not held together by firepower, but by fear and dependence. And so they had not fought the Dominion. They had removed its crutch. And now... Vroth staggered back, breathing hard. His vision blurred. His heart pounded not in battle rage, but in something worse. Something he had never felt before. Panic. He, the great Admiral Vroth, was afraid. The realization hit him like a plasma strike. He was afraid. Not of death, not of war, but of the unknown, of a universe where he had no purpose. "Admiral," the lieutenant pressed. "What are your orders?" Vroth's gaze flickered to the screens again. The Dominion's central command was gone. The core worlds were falling into rebellion. The human fleet had left. They had left. Because they didn't need to fight anymore. The Dominion had already lost. Vroth inhaled sharply. His next words came slowly, uncertainly, like they had never been spoken in the history of his kind. I don't know." A silence fell over the bridge, a heavy, soul-crushing silence. No one spoke, no one moved, because none of them knew either. For the first time, the Dominion, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was directionless. A fleet without a master, a people without a purpose. And Vroth, standing in the ruins of it all, realized a terrible, undeniable truth. The humans had not just destroyed the Dominion, they had forced it to become something new, and whether or not that was a mercy or a curse, only time would tell. Vroth stood motionless, staring at the holographic displays flickering around him. The weight of his existence pressed down on him in ways he had never experienced before. For the first time, there were no orders, no directives, no purpose. The Dominion had always told its warriors what to do, who to kill, who to conquer, who to fear. But now, with the Dominion crumbling, its guiding force gone, he and his officers stood like children abandoned in a storm, lost and without direction. The thought made his stomach twist. All around the command bridge, officers murmured to themselves, their voices hollow and uncertain. Some stared blankly at the displays, watching as entire worlds turned against their former masters. Others clutched at their own heads, struggling to process the sudden emptiness in their minds. And beyond this station? Chaos. Across the Dominion's vast empire, planetary governors were falling one by one, unable to command, without the absolute control they had relied on for centuries. Military outposts were surrendering without a single battle, their soldiers too paralyzed by the loss of their mental conditioning to resist. The once mighty Dominion fleet had fractured overnight. Some ships were fleeing, others were turning on each other. And the humans? They were gone. They had done what they came to do. They had not occupied the Dominion's worlds. They had not declared themselves rulers. They had not planted their flags or claimed territory. Instead, they had lit a fire and walked away. And now, Vroth and the remnants of the Dominion had been left to burn. He forced his trembling claws into fists. Number. This was not how it would end. He would not let it. The Dominion had survived wars, insurrections, assassinations. This was just another test. "We are not broken," he growled under his breath. The words felt weak, hollow, because the truth was far worse. They were broken. The entire Dominion was. And for the first time, there was no enemy to fight. Only themselves. A sharp breath to his right caught his attention. One of his officers, Commander Yeltrix, was staring at him with wild, desperate eyes. "Admiral, what do we do?" Vroth hesitated. What did they do? Every instinct in his body screamed for him to fight, to reclaim order, to strike back at the humans and restore the Dominion's strength. But how? With what? The humans had shattered more than an empire. They had shattered belief, the very foundation of what the Dominion had always been. Could it be rebuilt? Would it ever be the same? Number. Even if they clawed their way back from this disaster, it would never be the same. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. His vision was dark, clouded with the weight of defeat. But he had not survived this long by surrendering to despair. He straightened his posture, forced his voice into something strong, something unyielding. "We regroup." The officers looked at him with uncertainty, waiting for more. Vroth clenched his fists. "The Dominion is changing," he admitted, the words bitter on his tongue. "We do not have control over that, but what we do have control over is ourselves. We will not sit here like weaklings, waiting to be picked apart by scavengers." He gestured towards the collapsing images of Dominion-controlled space. "This will be a time of war, not against the humans, but against ourselves." Silence. Some of the officers looked horrified. Others simply seemed numb. Finally, Yeltrix swallowed hard. "You mean civil war?" Vroth nodded grimly. "What else did you expect?" He gestured to the chaos unfolding across the stars. "Every Dominion warlord who still holds power will try to claim the throne. Worlds will resist. Sectors will fracture. The Dominion is bleeding, and the only thing left to decide is who will survive the carnage." His words hung heavy in the air. Slowly, the officers began to straighten their backs. The fear didn't leave their faces, but something else flickered there now. Something old. Something familiar. They had lost the Dominion as they had known it, but they had not lost their instincts. Vroth could feel the shift in the air. The weak would die, the strong would rise, and the Dominion, whatever was left of it, would be reborn in fire. "Make contact with any remaining war fleets," he ordered. "We will gather whatever strength we have left. The humans may have broken our chains, but we are not finished." Yeltrix hesitated. "And if the humans return?" Vroth's mandibles twitched. He had no doubt they would. But by then, the Dominion would not be this weak, crippled thing. By then, they would be something new. He turned to the viewport, staring into the dark void beyond. The humans had left a wound so deep it could never be ignored. A scar that would shape the future of his people. He did not know what that future would be. But he knew this. The Dominion was not dead yet. And if the humans returned, they would not find the same enemy twice. The fires of the Dominion's collapse burned across the stars. Vroth watched from the command bridge as the final transmissions came in. Reports from distant worlds, fragmented and desperate. Some planets had declared independence, their people no longer bound by the Dominion's iron grip. Others had fallen into chaos, warlords carving up territories, fighting for scraps of what once was. And the humans? They had vanished into the void. Not a single ship remained in Dominion space. Not a single demand had been made. They had come, unmade everything, and left without a word. It was not mercy. It was something far worse. They had given the Dominion exactly what it had always feared. Choice. The Vroth's claws tapped against the metal of his command chair. The weight of his own words still hung in the air. Civil war is coming. He had no illusions about what that meant. The Dominion had always been ruled by absolute control, by the will of a single unyielding force. Without it, there would be bloodshed on a scale that even the humans could not have imagined. And yet, some part of him, a small, treacherous part, wondered if this was always how it was meant to be. For the first time, Dominion officers questioned. Soldiers hesitated before killing. Entire fleets refused to obey orders without reason. It was unnatural. And yet, it was right. The truth burned Vroth more than any weapon ever could. The humans had done what no enemy had ever managed. They had struck at the very soul of the Dominion, at the idea that control was the only path to strength. And they had proven it wrong. His mandibles clicked in irritation. He hated the thought, but he could not ignore it. The Dominion had been rotting long before the humans came. The wars, the constant expansion, the endless struggle for power. It had been leading to this moment for centuries. The humans had simply accelerated the inevitable. The command deck was quiet now. His officers, those who had not deserted or collapsed under the weight of their own thoughts, stood ready, not waiting for orders, not waiting for control, waiting for purpose. Vroth exhaled slowly. He had been born in the Dominion's golden age, raised in its doctrine, trained to be its sword. He had believed with every fiber of his being that power was absolute, that the strong ruled and the weak obeyed. But what happened when the weak were no longer afraid? His grip tightened around the armrest of his chair. He still did not understand the humans, their technology, their strategy, their beliefs. But one thing was clear. They had given the Dominion a choice. It could die, as the empire it once was, or it could become something else, something that could stand against them. He straightened, his voice calm but firm. "Prepare the fleet. We leave for the core systems." Yeltrix turned to him, confused. "Admiral?" Vroth stared at the screens, at the chaos spreading across what had once been his empire. "The Dominion as we knew it is dead," he admitted, "but its people live. And so long as they live, they will look for someone strong enough to lead them." He turned, mandibles clicking together. His voice was steel. "We will not let the humans decide our fate. We will rebuild, we will evolve, and the next time they come, they will not find a broken empire." He stepped forward, his eyes burning with something new. They will find an equal. Silence. Then, slowly, his officers straightened. The fear in their eyes did not vanish, but it hardened into something else, something closer to determination. The Dominion had lost, but it had not been destroyed, and one day, when the humans returned, they would not be facing the same enemy. They would be facing something stronger, something new. Vroth looked out into the void, where the last remnants of the human fleet had disappeared. And in that moment, he made a silent promise. Next time, it will be different. And the war would begin again.